Hi, my name is Jeff Rhodes, and this is another video on Microsoft 365. And today we're going to stick completely with Power Automate. So those of you who are subscribers to the channel, I'd like to encourage you to comment or otherwise contact me if you'd like to see any videos. And that's what we're going to do today. This is one of my videos about finding open slots on a calendar. And it's had a fair number of views already, but last couple of weeks I got a message from Tim here and says, any chance can you break this down for a novice? I'm not sure how to make the connections or the corrections needed. And then we correspond a little bit. And he said that his use case is pretty close to what I already showed in that video. But he's looking at and trying to get openings for an interview. So that's that part right there. So what I thought I'd do is go ahead and just do a little bit simpler version of the earlier flow. I first tried last weekend to make it and record the whole thing, but it was coming up on an hour already and I was still building it and so forth. So it does take a little while to do this. So I thought what would be more time efficient is just to go through the one I built and explain all the steps best I can. So hope this is useful. So let's just jump in. So in the earlier one, I was planning to connect it to Power Automate. So I started with Power Apps, starting with Power Apps parameters. But this one I thought just to simplify it a little bit, I just manually trigger it. So I'll probably do a later video where we'll convert this to kicking it off from Power Automate. But you can see I've got some parameters here. So I've got the start date and the end date, and then this time zone offset. And I put some defaults for my local area. But one thing to note is the time zone offset. That's really important here because what happens is, since it's up in the cloud, is that Outlook and so forth uses Greenwich Mean Time, GMT. And so you have to offset that to get to the time zone you're looking for. And GMT doesn't do daylight savings time either. So in my earlier one, it says kind of you pass in which time zone you are and it does the math. It basically adds an hour if you're daylight savings time. And that's actually where the 6 comes, because I'm in Mountain Time, US, and so the offset is actually 5, but since it's daylight savings time, it makes it 6 right now. So when we get to Power Apps, we can do some of that. And then we need the start hour, so we're not looking for times, at night and so forth, and the end hour. And since we're doing math on it, we want it in like the military or 24-hour clock. So 8 a.m., 5 p.m. or 17, you add 12 to it. So that's what's going on there. So what we do next is get a bunch of variables. And as you've seen in other videos, you need to initialize all the variables outside of a loop. And in many cases, we'll go ahead and put some values in there. So this one, I'm getting ready for Outlook, to when I send it, that I need a style because I want to show up my borders. When we get to the Teams chat, it doesn't make any difference. It kind of shows borders anyway. So that's why we're starting with that, and then an inline style. And then we're going to put this all in a table. And I know there's some HTML, connectors and so forth, but I just prefer to kind of do it on my own. So I'm just doing a table and then a header, and then this column span is going across multiple columns. So I can do a nice heading that says open slots for myself because it's my calendar. And then notice how I'm grabbing the start date and the end date from my flow. So whatever date I put in there, we'll do it. And then I'm closing off the row. So you can kind of see what's going to happen as we loop through the days and the open slots. We're just going to keep adding rows to this table. And then we've got some other ones. So var slot found, we're going to obviously use this. It's a Boolean, true or false. And we're going to actually reset that, but I want to initialize it to true. so we can tell if it's open or not. And then many of the calendars will have like focus time or planning time. And so I look for those specific words and kind of note those that they may be open. For the interview use case, we probably wouldn't do that, but I had it in my other example, so I thought I'd just keep that going. And then we're going to do a lot of variables about time and dates and so forth. So lots of math here. And so we're starting with our var start time, and we get to our first parameter. So we're going to see a lot of that. Let me see if I can zoom in okay here. Hopefully that's on the screen. We'll find out. And so what we're going to do is a lot of offset with this time zone. So we're adding hours, and then this trigger body date is our start date. And then it's a little too bad that it doesn't give the name of the parameters. You got to look at the order of your parameters. And this is our time zone offset, but it just says number. And then the second one is the start time, so that's number underscore 1. And then the end time will be, that's the 17, that'll be number 2. So we're adding from the date, we're adding the time zone, well, when we're adding hours to our starting date, and then we're putting the two together. So this is 7, and this is, or 6, this is the time zone offset, and this is 8. So we're adding 7 or 6 and 8 to get 14, and that's what we're going to start with. So it's 14 Greenwich Mean Time, or 2 p.m., even though it's 8 a.m. local time. So we'll see that when we run through, but that's what's going on there. So let me just close that. And then end time, very similar kind of thing. So you'll see now it's date 1, so that's the second date. So that's the end date. And then again, I'm adding the time zone offset and the 17 of there. So to kind of get that initialized. So let's scroll down a little bit. And then when we're looping it, I'm trying to make that clear that we're inside the loop. And so we're not putting any value in yet, but we've got a var loop stop time, a var loop end time, which I'm already initiating the start date, but I already set that up anyway. So I think that was left over, but it doesn't really do anything there. And then we're doing a var loop date, which we're keeping track of which just date we're in. So again, I initialize that to start date. Notice it's a string because they don't have a date time here. They just have string, Boolean, integer, float, which is like a decimal number, string, object, and array. And then what we want to be able to do is if we're looking like across a week, we want to exclude the weekends. And of course, if you've got different work times where you are, here I'm going to exclude Saturday and Sunday. So this var loop day of week, it's an integer because we've got a function that comes back. It's basically 0 is Sunday and 6 is Saturday, but we'll see that in a little bit. And then this var temp loop date, we just use right at the end of our loop. It's one of those things that basically what happens when we finish, go through an entire day. What we want to do is move to the next day and then set the, that would be the start one. But it didn't work well in the loop to kind of just set it initially. So I set like a temp value, and then in the next step we set the variable to the temp value. So it just helped get things from getting confused. And then this was really more of a troubleshooting thing when I was working on it, but I went and kept it. Had a var formatted end date. I was having trouble with it when I would just try to put it in the table with what the end time and the start time of each loop. So I made a variable so I could debug it a little bit. All right, so that gets all our variables going. And so now what we want to do is start looping through the day. So we're going to do a do loop. Okay, and you can see what happens. We're going to loop, and the way to, when you're looking at this after it's already built, is you go ahead and drop to the bottom so you can see the parameters at the end. Okay, so this is like the outer loop. So this is an entire day. And so we keep looping, and then we use the ticks function. So I'm going to zoom in on that again so we can see, because that's really important. So remember, we set that variable loop time, but we want to, the ticks converts it to like milliseconds or something. And so we want to be, it makes it nice for comparing dates because we can do it with numbers instead. So we have ticks, we keep going until the ticks of that one is greater than the var in time that we're on. Okay, so this one was var loop in time, and this is the var in time, which is the last date that we're going. So we keep looping. So we'll do Monday, and then we do Tuesday, and then we do Wednesday or whatever of, whatever week we're on. And when it finally this loop is greater than the end time we do, and we know we're done. So what we want to do now is let's go what we do inside the loop. Okay, so again, this is going to go from the start date to the end date. And actually, let me pause for a minute because I didn't actually show my calendar of what we're going to want to do. So, well, actually, I can just do it from here. We won't pause. Let me bring over to Outlook here. And this is not my normal calendar I use, so I just set it up for this demo. But we've got the week, and so I'm actually doing this on a Saturday. So this is last week, and this is next week. So you can see I set up some things just to make it easy for us to deal with. So I'll probably go through from the 14th to the 15th here and see that focus time. And I've got some planning sessions here. So I want those to show up on my list, but I want to mark those. And then what I'm looking for, so 9 to 9:30 should be open. I'm going to do it in half-hour blocks, 11 to 11:30, 11:30 to 12, then I stop for lunch and so forth. And so when we're looping, it's going to go all the way through the 14th and then all the way through the 15th. Say that if that's the start date and that's the end date. And if I went all the way, to Friday or whatever, you see I'm pretty much completely full for Friday. So should only show this focus time and planning time. Well, and then the time, since I'm going to 5, I should show some after here too. So, all right, let's go back. So what we're going to do first is set that var loop day of week variable. Because again, this could go, over a weekend and we want to skip it. So we have a nice function, var, or day of week, and then we're doing our loop date. Let's go back and look at that loop date. There we go, var. Oh, there it was. So that's the start date. Okay, so we know what date that is. So that's telling us which day we're on, and then we're going to increment that. So that's why we use the var loop date. And then we're going to do a condition. So we're going to say, okay, if that var loop date is equal to 0, or notice this defaults to and, but we want to change it to or the var loop day of week is equal to 6. So that's Saturday or Sunday or Saturday in order. Then if it's yes, we just don't do anything. So that's why that true is empty. If it's false or no, then we start doing all our stuff. So let's jump into the false case. So we say, okay, so we're not on a weekend. What do we do now? And we'll recognize this because this is very similar to what we did earlier. Let me zoom in. So we're going to use that loop date. Remember, that's just the starting date that we did as our parameter, and we're going to add the time, and then we're going to add hours to it, and then we're going to put the time zone offset and the start time. Okay, so again, like we were talking about earlier, that's going to be, we're starting this with 6 and this is 8, so it's going to add 14. So it'll start off at 2 Greenwich, Greenwich Mean Time in the morning. So we're initializing that, but of course we're going to keep incrementing that so we get a different one. So we'll, as we go to the next date. So then we're going to add minutes for the var loop. For the var loop end time, it's going to be whatever the start time was 30 minutes later. So again, 2 p.m., which is in our local time, is 8 a.m., and this will be 8:30. And then we're going to set up our heading. So we're going to take this date. So we're going to say, okay, I'm going to add a new row. I'm again going to span my column. So it says, okay, here's my open slots for the particular day I want. And normally, in my other example, I dynamically set the time zone. But here, since I'm making it a little simpler, I just say MT for Mountain Time. So we just use the format date there. So we spell out the day of the week, and then we say month, day, year. So it'll say like Monday, October 15th, or Monday, and then it'll say 10/15/2024. And again, we close off our row. So now we have another do loop. Let's close this. So again, let's look at the closing condition. So very similar, we're going to go back to that ticks. The var loop end time in numbers is greater than. Now let me zoom in on that again. So this is similar to what we had. So we're doing we're going to add the hours inside the var loop date, and then we're going to add, this is the time zone offset, but this number 2 is the end time. So we're basically going to keep looping through the day until we're past the end time. So again, this is 5 p.m. locally, but we're also adding on the 6, so that was 17, and then we're adding on the 6 for the time zones, which would be 23. So again, all this is getting converted to that Greenwich Mean Time. So that's how we know that we're done. Now we can finally get to the good part. So we've figured out what we want to do. I mean, we've gotten all the times and so forth, and we're going to go in to Outlook, and we've got a method called Get Calendar View of Events. And this is where if you've got access to somebody else's calendar, so in Tim's case, the interviewer that he's trying to get, he would grab, their calendar will show up there. For in this case, I'm just grabbing my calendar. Okay, and then the start time. So when I first set this up, I figured out a problem. What happens is if I use the top of the hour, if I've got one meeting that's going from 8:30 to 9, and then I'm open from 9 to 9:30, at exactly 9, it thinks that I'm busy because that other meeting is finishing off. And so to make this work, I just add 1 minute to it so that if they're back to back, I pick up what's happening in the next slot. So I've got the var loop start time, which is again in local things, the first time is 8 a.m. I'm going to add 1 minute, so it's 8:01 a.m. And then the end time that we're looking for events is the opposite. So I add minutes and I subtract, so I add a -1. So instead of it being 8:30, it's going to be 8:29. So hopefully that makes sense. And so that's going to we're going to loop through all the events, because notice you can have multiple things all scheduled at the same time. But I'm first going to reset some variables here. So I'm going to set the var slot found to true, and then I'll be able to set it false if it doesn't match. And then I'm going to set our var is focus or planning to false. And then now we're going to loop through events. Okay, and then notice what happens is that's what we put in there. And the way you get that is it'll, out of that get calendar view events, that gets the body value. So that's everything about the calendar event that, that's scheduled during the time I gave it. So you can see I've got now a conditions. I'm going to check for focus or planning time. And I didn't want to be worried about whether they capitalized the P in planning or whatever. So I used the to lower function, and then I grabbed the subject. So it can be a little challenging to do that. So let me just grab that. So I say to lower, and then I say dynamic content, and then I go to the calendar event and get the subject. So that's how we did that. And then that's how it looks, items, and then it gets the name of the loop and then calls it subject. So if that's equal to, and again, since it's lowercase, I got to write this in lowercase, focus time or planning session, then if it's true, then I just set that var focus or planning to true. And notice we've initialized it to false. So we don't have to set it to false. And then it says if it's false, then I check the status of it, because if it can have something there, but it can be free. If you mark it like, we do this in our organization, somebody sends you a, out of office notification or something, and they mark it as free, or maybe, you've got something that you're still there, but you want to show it on your calendar. So we don't want to exclude those. So we check if the status, the show as, so again, you get that going in here, and you got to show all or see more. And then I got to find it here. There it is, that show as right there. So if it's not equal to free, then if that's true, then I set the slot found to false. And if it is free, then I don't do anything, because notice, remember, I defaulted this to true, so I don't need, if it's still true, I don't need to set it again. And these can be kind of complicated. So what I like to do when I'm sorting it out is, and I'm trying to debug or whatever, is I just collapse it there. That's how I like this new designer. It's really good for that. So I've already gone down there. And so now I'm going to go in and I'm going to add the slot if it's available. And that's what I really like. Rather than just say, apply to each or condition, I like to put what it's doing. So I say, okay, because this is really a condition, but I say add slot if available, and then if that var slot found is true, then I go ahead and add it to my table. Notice if it's false, I don't do anything. So this one is an append to string. All these ones with the var slot text were appending to a string variable. And again, I'm just adding the row, but I'm not adding the end of the row yet, because I want to put, if it's planning or not, I want to put something after the date. But that's why I just do the start time. This is row, column, start time. Strong makes it in bold. And then I'm going to go ahead and format it. And this one, let's zoom in again, because now I got to go the other way here. So I'm adding hours. So I'm going to format it in the end, but I'm adding hours, the loop time, but now I want to subtract them. And the easiest way to do that is to multiply this MUL. Remember, the trigger body number is our time zone offset, and then I multiply it by -1 so that I can add hours and make it negative. So again, it'll come through, as a bigger number, and now I got to go back so it shows 8 a.m. or whatever, so that the user recognizes it. And then this G is a general format, this right here. So that's what's going on. That goes with the format date time. So it gives me a nice, day of the week, or, Monday, and in the time zone and so forth. Or the time, not the time zone. So anyway, we're going to put that in there. And then there's that formatted text where I was just doing the, kind of messing with it. So we don't really need to cover it. It's very similar to the other one. I was just putting it in a variable. And then now we're going to check if the focus time is true. If the focus time is true, all we're going to do is we're just going to add on there focus time. And even though it's planning or focus, we just put focus time on there just so they know that there's something there, but we can schedule over it if we need to. And then either way, we complete the rest of the line. Okay, and there's that formatted end time. So I just kind of done the math. That was the, where we showed the end of the slot. So again, it was 8 to 8:30. This will be the 8:30. And I was having some trouble with that, so I put it in a separate variable, which is why it doesn't just have that same add hours. I put it in that variable above. And then we close off the column and close off the row. And notice at the beginning we close off the strong because we're showing the start time in bold, not the end time. All right, so we can collapse that. So we've added the slot if available. And so now we've actually done it for the whole slot. So we now need to go back up and try the next slot. So we got to update our variables. Okay, so what we're going to do is the start time of our start time is we set it to our end time. So again, first one, we've got 8 a.m. is the start time, 8:30 a.m. is the end time. So our next time around, we're going to try 8:30 a.m. to 9 a.m. So we set the var start time to whatever the last var loop end time was. So again, we'll set it to 8:30. And then for the var loop end time, we just go back and add our minutes. So we're just going to add 30 minutes. So that'll, of course, make it 9 a.m. And then we're ending our loop, which we talked about already. So that's going to be, since we're not at the past 5 p.m., local time, it's just going to go back around the way we were doing it. So let's collapse that whole thing. So that will go through, whoops, actually I'm not sure I wanted to do that. Let's do that again. Oops. Yeah, sorry, I didn't cover this one. So that gets us to the end of this loop here. So we're going to keep going through the whole day. And then when we stop the current day, then we're going to jump into this step. Okay, so we've done through all of Monday, and now we're going to add days. Notice that before we had add hours and so forth, or even add minutes. This is going to add an entire day. So we started on Monday, now this is going to be Tuesday. And there's that var temp loop date. So we set this temp variable to that. And then we set the var loop date just to be the var temp loop date. So again, I've forgotten what the problem was, but it didn't like it if you just add one to the var temp loop date while you're in the middle. So I set it to a temporary variable and set it back. And so that's one where we're going to keep going until we've gotten past the end date that was our parameters. So 29 minutes in. I know this is taking a while, but hopefully, like I said, it's a little complicated. Got to keep it straight through, keep it organized. So we'll test this in a minute, but we're almost done. So if you think about what's happened to our HTML table, we've been adding rows for every day and every slot that's opened. But in order to display it, all I got to do is close off my table. So I just add a pin to var slot text, the closing HTML tag for the table. And now I'm ready to send an email. So normally what we would do, and we'll change this when we go to Power Apps, is we'd pass in, who this needs to get emailed to. But in this case, I'm just emailing it to myself. Okay, and then I'm going to put the subjects. Calendar information. Oh, I see I made a typo in there. Might as well fix it. information for start text to end date. So and then we put in for the body the var slot text. And while we're at it, we'll go ahead and post. So we're going to post as a chat bot and then do it as a chat. Again, the recipient is me. In this case, I didn't put the subject. I just put the var slot text in there. So let me, since I made that typo change, let's save. And then we will test. And just so we don't have to wait long, I'll just do 2 days. So we'll go back. I think we said we want to do let's do the 14th and the 15th. So I'll do manually. So I'll do the 14th to the 15th. And it's funny, these are defaults, but I have to go ahead and type them in. First I thought I could just get away with not putting them. So I'm going to say 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Run the flow. And this does take a minute. So I'm going to go ahead and pause here, and then I'll come back as soon as it's finished. All right, so it took about 2 minutes. You can see I've got check marks in here. So let's first just compare. Let me open up the email that we sent, and I'll put it over on this screen here. Whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. Here we go. Let me go over to Outlook for a minute so we can compare it to see what we had there. So here we go. We said, so there was that first row, open slots for me from the 14th to the 15th, open slots for Monday, 10-14. And so daily stand-up was at 8 o'clock, so we shouldn't get that. The focus time was there. There's that style, by the way, that gives us the borders. And then I should be open again at 9, which I am, 9 to 9:30. And then I've got this meeting, so the next one's at 11. 11:30 is open. Lunch is not open. Then I'm open all the way really through the rest of the day. So all my slots should be there, but then 3 o'clock is the planning session. So that looks about right. Let's see if it scrolled over to or that it moved when we went to the second day. So we've got Tuesday. Again, I skip 8:30. I've got focused, or 8 to 8:30. I've got focus time at 8:30. 9 and 9:30 are open. I've got this long meeting all the way up until 2. And then I've got through the end of the year, or end of the day. So that looked like it worked pretty well. Let's bring up can bring Teams over for a minute, and you see I got the same. Oops, I didn't get my Teams one here. That was an old one I tried it with. Let's just go back and see if it came through. All right, so we need to figure out if there's a reason that Teams didn't work, or maybe I just need to restart Teams. Let me pause for a minute and see if I'll restart Teams. All right, well, I'm back. I went to Teams in the browser, and it came through fine. So I'm not quite sure why it didn't work there, but you can see I get the same kind of table inside. The chat bot comes from workflows with the same thing. And it, as I mentioned earlier videos, it doesn't use that styles that I put in there, but it does a better job of showing the table. So that works pretty well. So let's go through and just debug this a little bit, just so that we can, I think sometimes looking at what it looked like, in the variables helps. So we'll spend just a few more minutes on this, and then we should be done. So let's just click a couple of these. Whoops, a little funky right now, isn't it? All right, let me exit out of this and come back. There we go. There's our debug there. Let's see if these are working now. Yeah, there we go. So you can see, let me zoom in on that a little bit. I know I've spent a lot of time on this, but there's remember how we talked about how we were adding those hours. And so we're saying the 14th, I passed in the 8, and then I passed in 6 for the time zone offset. So that's where it says 14 or 2 p.m. And so that's what we use on our loops and everything. So we'll go through all this, but then let's see. So notice we're expecting it to go 2 different days, Monday to Tuesday, so that makes sense. The var loop day of week is 1, which makes sense because it was a Monday. And so we check if it's a weekend. It doesn't go down this path. So we set the var loop start time. So again, notice it's that 14. And then the loop end time is 14 30 minutes later. So that makes sense. And then we do the loop. That's the 18 slots. 18 half-hour slots or 9-hour days, 8 to 5 p.m. with, say an hour for lunch or whatever. So we do that, so that makes sense. We get the calendar view of events, and so we can see the most important one here. And if you don't know your time zone offset and everything, you can just loop through and just watch them. But see, notice it says start date time UTC. And there's that. Remember how we added the 1 and then it ends at 14:29. We subtracted the 1. And then we can look at the outputs. And we can actually see, oh, here's the, maybe it's down here. See if we can find, somewhere in here it'll say the subject. And yeah, so show as, there's that show as is busy. As the organizer, I'm not totally seeing the subject right. Oh, there it is. Daily stand-up. So again, if you're trying to figure this out, just kind of loop through them and then just find the event you're looking for, and then you can tell. That's if so. If we didn't know how to find out the offset and everything, that's how we say so. Because it's on our calendar, it shows as 8 a.m. and this says 14. So obviously we need to add 6 to it to get it going. So anyway, I don't want to belabor that, but that's probably the hardest part of that. So we set these, and then we're going to loop. And there's, in all my examples, I only have 1 per spot. So, but if we had more than 1, then it would loop through. And then it's not focus or planning. So the first time we don't find the slot. So let's go through and go to the second one. Okay, this time it is focus or planning, because remember it was this focus time right here. So we don't go down that path. But then the slot is available, so we add to the slot time text, and see, notice we're giving it the date and everything, and we've said it's 8:30 a.m. because we subtracted back that 6 to get it right. And then we added the planning indicator on there, and we completed the row put on there. And then we looped back around. And then when we got to the end of the day, we set the loop text. Notice it's the next day, so it's 10:15, but it's midnight, 12 a.m. And then we're going to eventually, when we get back in, we're going to add in that 8 and the 6 through there. And then at the very end, we send the email and we post in the Teams channel. There's all that HTML. So, all right, well, kind of a slog there, but I hope that was helpful. If, again, working with those calendars is a bit tricky, leave me some comments and be sure to subscribe if you haven't. And I look forward to seeing you the next time.